Hi, my name is Kevin Aguilar. I'm representing Walt Disney Pictures today here at Con-Jour 2012. The film I'm promoting is The Secret World of Arrietty. It is based on the book The Borrowers. The film is a Japanese animated film, and they're bringing it here to North America, featuring the voices of Carol Burnett, Amy Poehler, and Will Arnett. Today I'm here at Con-Jour to promote the film, give out some free passes, free posters, and hopefully generate some more interest in the film. I'm happy to be here at Con-Jour 2012. Let's go.
Hi there, I'm Mel White. I'm one of the guests here at Con-Jour. I'm sitting here with my friend Rexy, who is actually one of the Texas dinosaurs. Many people don't know that we did have T-Rexes here in Texas. I'm a volunteer fossil preparator in addition to being a webcomics artist and a writer. You can see all my stuff at www.planetmel.com. But I worked on the largest dinosaur in Texas, Alamosaurus. She died about 60 million years ago, just as Texas was beginning to rise out of the ocean in the area of Big Bend. We found her, brought her bones back to the museum, and started preparing. Now, fossil preparation is not an instant thing. Her vertebrae were individually about as tall as I am seated in a chair and about as wide as I am seated in this chair. In life, they would have weighed a couple 100 pounds because these sauropods had bones like Cheetos. As I was working on her neck, I ran across a very crumbly area that I couldn't decide what it was, and I called over the paleontologist, Dr. Ron Kuzikowski, and said, "Ron, I can't work this. I have no idea what to do here." And he looks at this mess of crumbled rock and crumbled bone, and he puts his fingers on it, and he says, "T-Rex." I said, "What?" This animal, as tall as a 3-story building, had died, and there, on her neck, was a clear bite mark from a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, you can imagine how exciting that was. We finally finished prepping out the skeleton, and she'll be on display at the new museum in Dallas in about another year. They're going to make a plastic replica, put together all the pieces. You'll see her mounted in a crouch next to the T-Rex, who's actually only hip-high to her. Science is a beautiful and interesting thing. And to be a writer and writing about science and fictionalizing science, turning it into fantasy, is one of the most fun things ever.
Okay. This panel is horror and dark themes in young adult literature. Our moderator, Tracy McKinley, is doing the vagina monologues tonight. She's practicing for it. So I, Deborah Kent, the guest liaison, are going to take over as moderator. With me is...
I'm Glenda Boother, and I am your, dilettante amateur at all kinds of things. But as it happens, for the last few years, I've been reviewing a lot of books for Amazon, and I picked the juvenile and young adult partly because they're not as large as telephone books most of the time, and they're often much more fun to read than the ones that are as big as telephone books. So I've now been catching up on some of the juvenile and young adult literature, just in almost random. Here, review this, and it's been fun.
Okay, and our other panelist tonight is
Heather Poinsett Dunbar. I'm not an author of YA fiction. I'm an author, but I am a YA librarian. So that was why I volunteered for this panel, because I thought, well,
hello.
Hi.
Okay, come on in, have a seat. Okay. We just introduced ourselves. I'm the guest liaison. Ms. McKinley is not going to be able to make it tonight. So, and this is Glenda Boozer, and she has done a lot of reviews for Amazon in the young adult and literature area. And this is, I'm sorry,
Heather points at Dunbar.
Yes.
I know, it's a mouthful.
yeah, and she is a YA librarian.
Okay.
As a matter of
Is there
fact,
a way I could get around
Oh,
the tripod here?
Great.
I'm sorry. It's just
It's a book.
as a goddess-sized woman, it's kind of hard to get around.
These
All those little chairs.
No,
Yeah, they're not
no.
comfy.
All right. And again, the topic is horror and dark themes in young adult literature. Well, the one that we are most familiar with, that everyone has heard of, is the sparkly emo vampire. Is that actually considered horror or a dark theme? Either of you?
I haven't read them. I intentionally haven't read them. They didn't sound interesting to me.
I read 3 chapters of the first book and decided I wanted my 3 hours back. It just wasn't to my taste. I don't think I'd consider it horror. I think I would just consider it kind of a surprise sort of in the genre, and it just spoke to a lot of 14-year-old girls. And that was-
Supernatural romance or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you consider it horror of another vein, shall we say?
Well, I know that, yeah.
True.
I know as a parent, I actually worry about the message that it sends young girls. That being said, let's go ahead and move on to another topic, because this could be this particular subject could be a panel in itself. What have you been reading in the young adult area, Linda?
Well, I have recently picked up a couple of things by Catherine Jinks, and one of the ways that I know that I've gotten hold of gold, besides the fact that I like it, I will catch my daughter, who's 32, but she's always been interested in the juvenile literature. She buys me juvenile books for gift-giving occasions. But when I said, hey, would you like this book I've just read by Catherine Jinks, and she says, oh, I've got it already. Yeah, she's great. And so, you know, if Amanda Murray says it's good, then I know that I've got a good confirmation. But I liked the fact that Jinks hit on some scary things. I mean, in Living Hell, people got killed. People got killed ugly, but it doesn't quite mash their faces into total awfulness without hope. What I don't like is books where the theme is total despair. And even I read Genius Wars, and it was very suspenseful, and there's all this spy versus spy, and there's kind of this thread of paranoia, but there was still hopefulness. You know,
Do you think that that's something that we need in young adult literature, hope?
I think that's something we need all the time. I mean, if I read a book or see a movie with no hope in it, then I don't read it again or see it again.
Fair enough. Same question to you. What have you been reading in young adult literature, horror specifically, or anything that has dark themes?
Well, lately I've been trying to get into other areas because I kind of overread that, and I felt like I was missing out because I had kids asking me about other sides of the genre, and I felt like, well, I really do need to start paying attention to that. But there are some that, you know, just come across my desk that I pick up and read a couple chapters and then put it back out. But I think it's the last thing I read. Probably, well, it's something that a coworker stuck on my desk, and it's really old, actually. But I remember reading it in childhood, and I've been rereading it. Lloyd Alexander's series, A Book of Three. So that's what I've been redoing because, I don't know, I had a couple kids come in and say, Heather, what's this about? Heather, what's this about? And I was like, oh, I remember this. So I snatched it away from them and kept it on my desk.
I remember at one point you were talking to me about Jessica's
Guide for Dating on the Dark
Side.
Side. And I haven't really gotten more than a few pages into the sequel, but I am going to be writing a review for Jessica Rules the Dark Side.
Okay,
And you know,
I read the first one and I found it kind of iffy, but it was.
depends a little bit on what you're comparing it with.
Right.
And, you know,
Right.
I did particularly, I mean, having grown up, envying the cheerleader, blonde, beach girl type.
Right.
The fact that Jessica in these books becomes aware that she, being tall, dark, and curvy, was magnificent. And actually the blonde beach girl thing doesn't last as long as magnificent does. But,
Right.
but yeah, you know, there are certainly some
Right.
things in there for teenagers to bat around different ways. And there's some scary stuff in that book. I mean, people are killing each other. Yeah.
What are some of the common themes that you have found in the horror genre of young adult literature? And I'm not just talking Goosebumps or H.L. Stein. I'm talking other things out there.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned despair earlier, because I noticed a lot of kids actually seem to kind of want to have a little bit of despair.
Like the Lemony Snicket's
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah. It's almost like, well, you know, I'm going through all this tough stuff growing up, and I want to see someone who's doing a little worse than I am, in a way. To, you know, just to reassure myself that, you know, I may have it bad, but not that bad.
So it's sort of therapy for them?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, right.
Yeah, and, yeah. And now I finally remembered what I was reading. I was reading the new Heather Brewer, she started a new Slayer, a Vampire Slayer series.
Okay.
So that's what I've been,
I'll have to
yeah.
take a look at that. One that I got into over the last year was the Vladimir Todd Chronicles.
Yes.
And I absolutely loved that series.
Yes, that's wonderful. And if you ever have a chance to meet Heather Brewer, do it, because she is just fabulous.
Oh, that's right. She wrote those, didn't
Yes.
she? Okay, so
Yeah, and then she moved on to this new series where she, you know.
she's working from the other side,
Yeah.
whereas with the Vladimir Todd series, it was working from the vampire side, and you saw the Slayers as sort of people that came in every now and again. But I don't know. I think that the one Slayer that she had in that series, she actually developed pretty well, even though he was a side character.
Yes,
So.
yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and open this up to the audience if they have any questions.
Yes, especially for the young adult librarian, the woman who works, like you're the librarian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're selecting like horror novels and things to go in a library's collection, what kind of criteria do you use to evaluate?
Unfortunately, I don't get a lot of say in what is sent to me. Due to the recent budget cuts, they actually have someone else who does that. Once in a while, I'll get to, you know, do a gaps order list and find some things. Lots of times, most of the time, I just have my core group of kids that I ask, you know, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And a lot of times if they tell me like, oh, that sounds kind of boring, or, you know, oh, that sounds kind of cool, I might read that, I'll get a couple copies of that. But I don't know, I know most of the time when the rare occasions when I do get to go and help with selection, you know, some of the things are pretty amusing. I know we had, what was it? I was thinking, okay, we did mermaids already, and now they're going on to, what was it, Centaurs or something like that. And that was the latest craves, apparently,
Mhm.
or what
What
they.
are they?
Yeah, these motifs, they've done
Yeah.
vampires nearly to death, and I've had enough zombies to last.
Yeah, and then they had angels, and they had demons, and then supposedly the one who wrote Twilight is working on a mermaid book, and I think the mermaids are already done to death already.
I've read some good birthdays.
Yeah.
Have you
but
noticed any constants on what is popular? I mean,
I'd say vampires are always consistently popular because everyone has a different take on them, and regardless of what you think, you have your core group of kids who's like, oh yeah, vampires, vampires, vampires.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, all right, and like I said, I'm thinking about, I'm asking questions in terms of, what gets things taken out of the slush pile and what gets things considered. Are there any absolute dead turn-offs, avenues you can't ever go down?
We were laughing over the Centaur, like, we were flipping through the book, and this was one of the reasons why we turned it down. We were like, oh my God, there's a sex scene. Or, and we were just thinking, I'm sorry, that's just a bit much. Or not so much, almost, or wasn't so much sex as it just, the thought she was considering it, the main character. And we kept thinking,
Is that
bestiality
Centaurs
or-
is the title?
it might be. It
Okay,
was very,
I decided not to review that one, so I'm just
yeah,
wondering,
it was
it may come around
very
again.
strange, and I was flipping through it also, and I was like, I don't like it because it's in present tense, and I don't know why that's just a turn off to me. That it just seems hard for me to read, but I was like, well, that's just me. What do y'all think of it? And they were just like, there's sort of an almost sex scene, ooh, and that just kind of turned us off immediately. It wasn't so much, teenagers having, getting close to that. It was just the idea of something that was kind of half horse. That kind of was a turn off. Okay, see, yeah.
So the creep out factor there.
Yeah. So I would say that.
Okay, is there a level at which it can happen? And I've gotten a couple of interesting, polite but scribbled on rejection letters, and something like, this might have a chance in young adult, but you're going to have to cut out the sex. And I'm just wondering,
I've actually talked.
is there a level that you can put in there? I don't know, romantic tension or whatever, or?
I would say yes to romantic tension, but
Well, it used to be in movies that the PG rating where they would do everything up to the act, and when they started, the camera would pan
Right.
away. I think that's kind of more of what, if anything, they're looking at, because that is actually
Okay.
something that
So
I've asked other authors about.
So basically, you can't describe anything interlocking, but it can be assumed afterwards that, okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The books I specifically remember that got pretty hot were also where the characters were married to each other, so that takes some of the, but still no explicit detail.
Yeah.
Just, okay, they went to bed, yes, one can assume.
Yeah. 'Cause I know in the sparkly vampire one, they get very graphic from what I have heard.
They
I read the first. Well, they don't
They
get.
don't.
They don't. You hear about it. though.
Yes, you
guess-
hear later, but no, they don't.
Yeah.
No, I
Okay.
read this, I read that specifically to find out how they.
Dot,
did
dot,
that.
dot, and the kids fill in the dots, right?
Not
Well, I
even
don't know.
that.
I mean,
because-
they talk. I mean, she talks about. There's this in the fourth book.
Yeah, I
the
read,
fourth book. You know which one I'm
I
talking
read those books, yes, I was interested.
Well-
To find out, what is.
What's it all about?
No, I
Yes,
understand.
how are they able to
I
get on
have-
bestsellers list?
See, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and my husband and I read or listened to the audiobooks because it is her age that is very interested in those books. And I was like, okay, considering what I'm hearing about these books, I want to be prepared to have a talk about appropriate behavior. And it really, okay, not going there, not going there, but she describes a thing, or there's an area in there where the main character wakes up and she has been beaten after their honeymoon together. And it worries me because he sits there and he apologizes for it. He says, I'm sorry. And she goes, oh, it's okay. I think I really liked it. And I'm like, no.
Oh, that's
No.
Well, the point was that he wasn't able to control his strength as a man.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but looking at this from...
You're not sure a 13-year-old will process.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
And even at 16 to 17 years old, when they romanticize stuff like that, you want to be able to, thank you for nodding and agreeing with me, you need to be able to know what your child is reading, even at that age, so you can discuss with them.
So I have a question, Deborah.
Yeah.
Do you ever say, Bridget, you cannot read that?
And if so, why? What would put a parent off the book?
I mean, I have my own answer as a parent, but.
Okay. As far as the sparkly books are concerned, I'm not going to name them by name. Yes, she can read them. Yes, she can even read that part that really, really
Bothered.
Yeah, bothered me. And I have reasons for that. I'll talk about that off camera. There's one book that was recommended in one of the classes that I had to take here. Dr. Gorman, love him to death, called The Painted Bird. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've heard of it.
Okay.
That's all I can really tell you.
The entire story is supposed to be this child who was treated very, very badly, and that's putting it mildly, by the Nazis, by the communists. I mean, it gets gory, it gets graphic, it gets really, really nasty graphic. Now, as an adult reading this, that's one thing. I know that the author who wrote it, I can't remember his name right now.
You asked me to come in here for filming this, but it turns out I have a panel at the same time.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Go ahead and
Such stuff as dreams are made of. Amy ran and ran until the muscles in her legs cramped so badly she thought she would fall, but the monster was close behind. She ran over sharp stones and through thorns and branches, but didn't feel the pain of the cuts and bruises on her feet. She was aware that they were wet with blood, but all she felt was the ache in her legs. After a time, the rocks in her path became large boulders, and she began looking for a crevice to hide. The creature was huge and black, and its claws were sharp, ripping bark from tree trunks as it lumbered after her. At last, a shallow cave-like opening between the rocks, too small for the beast to follow. She darted inside, pressing herself as far into the narrow crack as she could, and instantly the strength in her legs was gone, and she collapsed into the tiny hollow, each gasp for breath a tiny sob. The monster slammed its body against the opening, causing more stones to fall. Its stench was overpowering. She cowered, closing her eyes as the massive claws reached in, and she felt them close around her ankle, drawing her slowly out. She woke to the sound of her alarm, sunlight filtering through the blinds. Her heart was still pounding and there was a cramp in her leg. She'd overdone her running the night before. She was surprised to find her cheeks were wet with tears. This had been a bad one. Jeff, she called. Hey, good morning. Oh, honey, another bad dream? You frowned. Where were you?
James.
I'm just making coffee. It's okay, it's okay. He sat beside her and put his arms around her. Did you make an appointment with Dr. McKay? This is happening way too often. Don't worry about it. I'm going to get something. Don't want the doctor. What can she do?
introduce?
I don't know, but neither do you. I'm calling her myself, Jeff said, and looking down, she saw that she'd driven her nails into her palms hard enough to make bloody crescents. I'll see her, she said weakly. Dreams, said Dr. McKay. Fascinating. There have been countless theories about them, where they come from, but today we're pretty sure they're just a way our subconscious deals with unresolved issues.
Crazy?
What are you afraid of?
I'm sorry, I would sit and talk with
I'm
you.
afraid to
but
go
I've
to
got
sleep, she answered. I really don't think I have any big unresolved issues except for this.
Okay, I'll
We
just
need to
wander.
find a cause. What are some of the other theories? Well, skipping over the ridiculous ones, there are certain types of epilepsy which are rare, and I really don't suspect that. Are there certain drugs that can make a person dream vividly? Drugs? What drugs are we talking about? She asked anxiously. Dr. McKay leaned back in her chair and studied Andy. Why didn't you tell me? It had been really stupid what they had done. They had decided to escape the heat of the city and go into the mountains to camp for a week last summer. Jeff had read a book about the Nujak people, a little-known Native American tribe that had lived in that region, and they meant to look for arrowheads and pottery shards. They went far from the public campgrounds and didn't see another person for a week. There'd been a feeling of unreality the whole time, as if they were living 1,000 years ago. They went naked and bathed in the stream, and at night they smoked a little weed and ate fish that they had caught and anything else they could gather. She was collecting mushrooms after a rain, carefully comparing them to the field guide she had studied when she came upon one she had not seen in any picture. Pale violet with a yellow stem, it was beautiful. Jeff, come see, isn't it lovely? Honey, you know what this is? It's in my book. It wasn't in my mushroom book. No, the one about the Nujak. It's the one they used for ceremonies, when they wanted to get in touch with the great spirits, he said dramatically. It's one of those kinds of mushrooms. Oh my God. You want to try it? And if it had been any other week, they would never have considered it. But they were so far from their ordinary life, and they wanted to be wild, to take dares. She remembered what it was like. At first, there was a feeling she was moving through water slowly. Her fingers made trails in the air like sparklers. The fire grew enormous and receded. Then things started to crawl out of it, emerging from the flames as if through curtains. Strange things, a lizard-like reptilian cat, a purple spider the size of a basketball, bigger things. She closed her eyes. The ground shook with the weight of enormous footsteps, and something with many legs slithered through the grass. She fell asleep. And that's about when the nightmare started? Asked Dr. McKay. That was the first one, she said. And that's about when the nightmare started? Asked Dr. McKay, and began to change, her face elongating and withering somehow, her hands turning to yellow talons as she reached for Amy. Was it like this? She woke with a start and screamed, Jeff! And he came into the room with a cup of coffee for her, but as she sipped, she saw that the cup was full of writhing squid-like things, and she threw it against the wall, saying, Oh, dear God, as she woke. And then she was back in her room, and there was Jeff climbing onto the bed and taking her in his arms. Looking over his shoulder, she saw the shattered coffee cup and thought, odd. She didn't want to sleep, but when she started to doze off behind the wheel a few times, she realized she had to, at least a little. By Saturday, she was so tired. She sank into the pillows, and suddenly she was surrounded by little fairy-like creatures of all colors. They danced around her head, whispered into her ear all kinds of delicious secrets, and stroked her hair comfortingly. She wanted to stay with them forever. She woke with a smile and imagined she saw one of the tiny creatures dart into the curtains. How nice. Dreams could also be pleasant, and going about her weekend routine, she fancied that there was a fairy floating around her, almost out of sight. Sometimes now she woke up with scratches and bruises. Sleepwalking, said Dr. McKay, and prescribed a strong sedative. But it made her feel dopey and hazy, and almost as if she never really woke up. She imagined she saw and heard all kinds of dreamlike beings all the time now. Jeff, I think these things may be real. I don't think it's all in my mind, she said in the night. You're scaring me, Amy. Hush now and go to sleep. She was pursued by an armless, slavering creature with a huge gaping mouth as she ran along the beach. Nowhere to hide, and the creature was gaining on her, springing along on two enormous clawed feet. It made a deep, chuckling noise. She threw herself into the surf and woke damp and panting and reached for Jeff, but her hand found a bloated fish corpse. She was still on the beach. She screamed and woke again and found herself in a room, but there was no ceiling. The sun was right overhead and vultures were gathering, and she realized she could still hear the noise the thing made. She resigned herself to die and be eaten, and she covered her face and woke in her own real room at last. The alarm was finally going off, and she sighed deeply, shudderingly, and began to compose herself, thinking, It's easy to mistake a dream for reality, but much harder to mistake reality for a dream. She swung her legs to the side of the bed and started to feel for her slippers when a noise made her turn her head. The armless creature stood between her and the window. It chuckled and opened its mouth for her, but she was gone, down the hall and out the door into the street. Jeff, your wife is very ill. I've given her as much barbiturate as she can tolerate, but she needs a safer environment, the doctor said as Amy moaned in her sleep. You want to hospitalize her? Jeff asked, overwhelmed. She ran right into the street and was hysterical. She could have been killed. If you think that's best, we'll be able to evaluate her condition better there. It's a nice place. I'll make the arrangements. When the ambulance left, Jacob started to straighten the room. He pulled away the blanket Amy had thrown on the floor and had to look twice before he could credit what he saw. In the wooden polished floor were several deep gouges, and one board was cracked as if something massive and heavy had sat on it. A smell like dead fish filled the room. How crazy was she? How crazy was he? He thought, maybe I should have listened to her. Maybe it wasn't all just Amy, that everything he'd ever believed rebelled against this thought. No, be rational. There had to be a more natural explanation. Amy could have scratched the floor herself. But the cracked board and the smell? But even as he thought these things in shock, he saw the dust motes suspended in the rays of sunlight, the daisies in the orange vase, the socks left on the floor, and the familiar soothingly supplanted his thoughts of the unwanted, as it most often does. Far in the back of his mind came the idea, if she's been through something truly horrible, the hospital is probably the best place for her after all. Yes, the hospital was best for Amy, where she'd have doctors to help her deal with this thing instead of him, where she'd be safe. Amy woke up shuddering and gasping in the narrow bed alone in her clinically neat room. She scanned her surroundings with wide eyes before she dared to move. A nurse, alerted by the monitor, came quickly, hoping to avoid a full-blown crisis. She sat on the edge of the bed and spoke soothingly, stroking Amy's back. It's okay, Tom. It's just a bad dream and it's over. We're all right here to be sure nothing can harm you. Calm voices and unhurried footsteps could be heard in the hall, but she couldn't know if any of it was real. The drugs I gave her helped, but there were too many drugs. She stayed in a kind of stupor, never really awake, but trying not to sleep. Jeff came to see her the third day. Where can we talk? Over in the day room, she said listlessly. He followed her trailing bathrobe to a corner of the communal patient lounge. Amy, he whispered, I think you're really in danger. Really? What was your first clue? No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but to tell you the truth, I don't much care anymore. That's the drugs they're giving you. I can't stand to see you like this. If something happens again, how will you deal with it? If something happens again, does it mean you believe me? I don't know what I believe, but I don't believe you're crazy, and I'm getting you out of here. Dr. McKay agreed to a discharge only because Jeff said he had found another hospital closer to home and wanted to drive her there himself. You're going straight there, understand? They're expecting you. Of course, Jeff promised the doctor. But when they got on the highway, he turned away from the city into the mountains. Where are we going? Amy asked without much interest. We're going back where this started, back to our campground. It's all I can think of to do. Nobody can help us with this. I've been studying books about the Nurjat. I figured they must have seen this before, and somewhere in their medicine would be some kind of a cure. There's not a lot of first-hand accounts of their ritual, but there are some. There are no living descendants from the tribe. What happened to them? It doesn't matter. A lot of small settlements disappeared very suddenly. Do I have to eat the mushroom again or won't? No, whatever was in it. Well, it's in you now. We only need the fire. Why did it just happen to me? It's in you too. I don't know. I don't understand it. But you know, I don't think I could go through what you have. I'd lose my mind. By the time they got into the mountains and found their old place, the effects of drugs had worn off and were replaced by fear. And as the fire took hold and reached upward, that strange underwater feeling returned. It was much like before, and she saw the weird shapes writhing in the flames. Beginning to emerge, she closed her eyes. Open your eyes, Amy. You have to look at the fire. I don't think I can. Look at the fire. You get together all the strength you have and take control. Beat the thing down and you kick its ass. It's said that we can't do this a third time. She thought about it. She was strong. She gazed at the fire and then went into it. Jeff gazed at the ceiling of the tent. Amy lay beside him, exhausted. I can't believe what just happened out there. I can't believe you're okay, he said wonderingly. I'm okay, but I don't think I've ever been this tired. I need to sleep. To sleep, or a chance to dream? I don't think so, she said, and drifted off. Underwater, the thing reached out with spiked tentacles ready to feed. Malevolent and aware, it settled over its victim. Deep below the surface, there was no escape. There was no air. Jeff woke and thought, thank God it's over. He saw the marks the tentacles had made on his arms and began to scream.
Thank you.
Paul Cooley.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Tilley. I actually developed the role-playing game Manapunk. We are actually here at Con-Jour 2012 for the first time. We are an independent operation developing a new role-playing game, D6-based system, and we're very excited to be here.